The air in the Alabama summer of 1858 was thick and heavy, the kind of heat that presses down on your chest and makes secrets hard to breathe. And secrets, you see, were the only things keeping Elias Thorne and Clara alive, or at least keeping their world from collapsing entirely. Elias was the master of Willow Creek, a big, imposing house set back from the road, surrounded by fields that stretched out forever. He wasn't old, maybe 35, and he carried the weight of that house and all. The people in it, like a poorly fitting coat. He was supposed to be strong, decisive, the man who never showed weakness. But his weakness, his whole heart, belonged to Clara. Clara was the housekeeper. She was the one who knew where every spoon belonged, how the light hit the dining room just right at sunset, and which curtains needed mending. She moved like smoke through the grand hallways, efficient, quiet, and absolutely essential. She was also enslaved, owned by the very man who loved her, a fact that sat like a stone in the pit of Elias's stomach every single morning he woke up. Their relationship had grown slow, like moss on a shaded tree. It wasn't the sudden, fiery passion you read about in cheap novels. It was built on respect and shared silence. Elias had inherited the plantation young, and he found he could talk to Clara about the crops, about the failures of the overseer, or even about the sad, heavy history of the house, in a way he couldn't talk to his own cousins or neighbors. She listened, not just with her ears, but with a deep understanding that seemed to cut right through the rules of their time. But love in 1858 Alabama, when one person owned the other, wasn't just frowned upon. It was an act of war against society. It was treason against the very structure of the South. Elias knew this. He knew that if anyone, especially his judgmental and powerful Uncle Robert, ever caught wind of his feelings, let alone his actions, everything would be ruined. Clara would be sold south, and he would be branded a fool, perhaps even institutionalized for breaking the sacred rules of property. Yet the idea of owning Clara felt like a constant, burning lie. He couldn't stand the thought that she was just a piece of property, something that could be taken away, sold off, or abused by the next man if he were to die suddenly. He wanted her to be his wife. He wanted God to witness their commitment, even if the law of man refused to. The planning of the wedding was a masterpiece of fear and devotion. It took 6 months of whispered conversations, glances exchanged across the kitchen table late at night when the cook was asleep, and coded messages delivered through the old stable hand, Moses, who was deaf and therefore, Elias hoped, discreet. They chose the dead of winter, a night when the cold was so sharp it kept everyone huddled close to the fires, making the outside world seem distant and safe. The ceremony wasn't held in a church, of course. It was held in the small, dusty root cellar beneath the smokehouse, a place so humble and forgotten that only rats and forgotten potatoes ever saw it. Elias had managed to arrange for an old free black preacher, Reverend Silas, to travel up from Mobile under the guise of visiting a sick relative. Reverend Silas was a brave man, risking his own freedom just by being present. On the appointed night, the world felt muffled. Clara wore a simple dark dress she usually reserved for Sundays, but she had sewn a small, delicate lace collar onto it, a tiny defiance. Elias wore his usual Sunday suit, trying to look normal, trying not to sweat through the thick wool despite the cold. He met Clara by the well, his heart hammering against his ribs like a fist against a door. "Are you ready, Clara?" he whispered, his voice catching on the wind. Clara looked up at the vast, starless sky, then back at the dark outline of the house, where her life was defined by chores and fear. "I have been ready since the day I realized my soul was no longer mine to keep," she replied, her voice steady, stronger than his own. They slipped down the narrow, rickety steps into the root cellar. The air smelled of damp earth and preserved apples. Reverend Silas was already there, holding a flickering lantern that cast long, dancing shadows on the dirt walls. He had his worn, leather-bound Bible open. The ceremony was short, perhaps 10 minutes long, but it felt like an eternity compressed into a single, terrifying breath. Reverend Silas spoke softly, his words clear and solemn, cutting through the silence. He didn't use the usual fancy church words. He spoke plainly about commitment, about God's eye seeing past the color of skin or the chains of man. When Elias placed a simple, thin gold band, smuggled from New Orleans months ago, onto Clara's finger, his hand trembled so violently he almost dropped it. It was a secret symbol, one she would have to wear hidden on a chain around her neck, never on her hand. "By the power vested in me by the Almighty, I pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Silas concluded, closing the Bible with a quiet snap that sounded, in the stillness, like a gunshot. Elias looked at Clara. They were married. Legally, officially, according to the state of Alabama, nothing had changed. She was still his property. But in their hearts, in that cold, damp hole in the earth, they had forged a bond stronger than any law. They had become a unit, a secret, army of two against the world. Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't known was possible, a sense of belonging that was not tied to service, but to love. Reverend Silas gave them a stern look. "Master Thorne, you know the gravity of this oath. If the world finds out, they will not just separate you, they will destroy you both. Your duty now is silence, absolute, unbreakable silence." Elias nodded, pressing a few crumpled bills into the preacher's hand, far more than he could afford to lose. "We understand, Reverend. Thank you. May God protect you on your journey." They parted quickly. Clara returned to the kitchen quarters, slipping back into her role as the quiet, watchful housekeeper. Elias returned to the main house, sitting in his library, pretending to read accounts, the smell of damp earth clinging to his trousers. The marriage changed everything and nothing all at once. During the day, Clara was still Clara, the servant. She brought Elias his coffee. She dusted the furniture. She supervised the laundry. She called him Master Thorne in front of the other staff and his few visiting neighbors. But now, when she handed him his cup, their fingers would brush, and in that fleeting contact, a whole conversation would take place, a conversation of shared risk and shared love. Elias had never been a cruel master, but after the marriage, he became obsessively protective. He made sure Clara never worked outside the house where she might be, exposed to the rougher elements of the field hands or the gaze of outsiders. He started dismissing the overseer's complaints about her not being rigorous enough with the other house slaves. He shielded her, subtly, constantly. This increased attention, however, started to raise eyebrows. The person who noticed the most was Mrs. Delia Thorne, Elias's aging, sharp-eyed aunt, who lived in a small cottage on the edge of the property and considered it her moral duty to monitor Elias's affairs, especially since he had no wife. Aunt Delia was the keeper of the Thorne family legacy. She believed in strict hierarchy, clean lines, and the absolute separation of the races. She found Clara too poised, too intelligent for a servant. "Elias," Aunt Delia remarked one afternoon, sipping lemonade on the veranda, watching Clara supervise the cleaning of the silver. "That girl, Clara, she moves like she owns the place. You indulge her too much. She needs to remember her station." Elias forced a casual shrug. "She is efficient, Aunt. Efficiency saves me money." "Efficiency," Delia sniffed, adjusting her bonnet. "Or familiarity. I see the way she looks at you when you are not looking back. There is a boldness there that I do not care for. You must be careful, nephew. A master must maintain order." Elias felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He knew Delia was watching them like a hawk. Every extra minute he spent talking to Clara about the household budget, every time he accepted a second piece of pie just because she had baked it, was noted and filed away in Delia's memory as evidence of impropriety. The pressure mounted. Elias began to realize that their secret marriage was not enough. If he died, or if he became incapacitated, Clara would revert to being property. She would be inherited by his nearest relative, most likely his Uncle Robert or Aunt Delia, and they would sell her instantly out of spite and fear of scandal. He needed to protect her legally. He needed to make their marriage real in the eyes of the law, even if the law refused to see it. The only way, the desperate, dangerous way, was through his will. Elias started making discreet inquiries. He traveled to Montgomery under the pretense of buying new breeding stock, but instead he met with a sympathetic, though cautious, young lawyer named Mr. Harrison. Harrison was horrified by the risk Elias was taking. "Mr. Thorne, you are talking about freeing a slave and leaving her substantial property. In this state, a marriage to a person of color is not recognized. If you die, your family will challenge this immediately. They will say you were mad or coerced," Harrison warned, wiping sweat from his brow. "I need a will that is airtight, Mr. Harrison. A will that not only grants her freedom, but grants her the house, and a sum of money large enough to ensure she can never be touched," Elias insisted. He was willing to sacrifice his family's approval, his reputation, everything for Clara's security. They spent weeks drafting the document. It was complex, full of legal hedges and clauses designed to anticipate every possible attack from the Thorne family. Elias was careful not to mention the marriage explicitly in the document itself. That would be too provocative. Instead, he referred to Clara as his devoted and loyal housekeeper, rewarding her for her years of exceptional service and personal comfort. The key was the execution of the will. It had to be witnessed by people who were absolutely trustworthy and who could testify to Elias's sound mind and body should the inevitable challenge arise. Elias chose two men, the aforementioned lawyer, Mr. Harrison, and Dr. Peterson, the aging family physician who had known Elias since he was a boy and held a deep, quiet affection for the young master. One rainy evening, just before Christmas, Elias brought the final signed document back to Willow Creek. He didn't keep it in the house safe, where Aunt Delia or Uncle Robert might stumble upon it. He wrapped it in oilcloth, sealed it with wax, and buried it in a lead box deep beneath the old dead oak tree at the far edge of the property, the one landmark he knew Clara would remember if something happened to him suddenly. He told Clara about the will that night, whispering the details into her ear as they lay side by side in his large four-poster bed, careful not to make a sound that could carry past the thick walls. "If anything happens," he murmured, stroking her hair, "you must go to the oak tree. The lead box is yours. It guarantees your freedom, Clara, and it guarantees this house." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. It was a terrifying gift. Freedom was a dream so distant she barely dared to believe it. But the implications of the will were enormous. It was a declaration of war against the Thorne name. "Elias, your family will never accept this. They will fight it until the last penny is spent," she whispered back, her voice tight with worry. "Let them fight," Elias said fiercely. "I am the master here. This house is mine to give, and you, my wife, are mine to protect." The existence of the will provided a fragile shield, but it also increased the tension in the air. Elias became jumpy, constantly checking the locks, watching the road. He began to feel the heavy weight of his family's expectations bearing down on him, especially as the holidays approached and his relatives started arriving for the annual gathering. Uncle Robert Thorne, the patriarch of the extended family, arrived first. Robert was a man built like an oak barrel, stern, unforgiving, and obsessed with appearances. He ran his own plantation 20 miles west with an iron fist, and he viewed Elias's slightly softer approach to management as weakness. Robert noticed the changes immediately. He saw the quality of the food, the cleanliness of the house, and the quiet comfort Elias seemed to take in his solitude. "You're getting soft, Elias," Robert boomed during dinner, stabbing a roast potato with his fork. "You should be married, with sons to inherit this land, not wasting your time fussing over house affairs. This place needs a mistress." "I am perfectly capable of running Willow Creek, Uncle," Elias replied, trying to keep his tone level. "Perhaps. But you are too reliant on that girl, Clara. She moves through this house like she is the lady of the manor, and I heard you haven't disciplined a field hand in months." "Discipline, Elias. That is what keeps the order." Clara, serving wine just behind Robert's chair, froze for a moment, waiting for Robert to turn and catch her eye. She felt the pressure of his disapproval like a physical heat. She knew that if Elias faltered, even for a moment, Robert would find a way to take control, and she would be the first casualty. The house filled up with relatives, cousins, aunts, and their children, all observing, judging, and waiting for Elias to make a mistake. The secret marriage became a diamond pressed between two stones, the immense pressure threatening to shatter it at any moment. Elias and Clara had to be more careful than ever. They communicated almost entirely through glances now, or through the specific placement of objects. A book left open on a certain page meant danger. A shawl draped over the back of a chair meant the coast was clear for a moment's shared breath in the pantry. But the most immediate threat wasn't the distant family. It was Aunt Delia, who was residing permanently in the cottage. She had started making unannounced trips to the main house late at night, claiming she couldn't sleep, but really she was watching. She was waiting to catch Elias in a compromising position. One chilly evening, Delia decided to test the boundaries. She claimed she needed a specific tonic from the master's private medical cabinet, just after midnight. Elias was in his room. Clara was not supposed to be there, but she was, helping him mend a tear in his riding coat, a task she often performed late when everyone was asleep. They were sitting close, their heads bent together over the fine stitching. Elias's heart stopped when he heard the faint, distinct tap of Delia's cane hitting the polished mahogany floor of the hallway. "Quickly, Clara, the wardrobe!" Elias hissed, shoving the coat and needlework under a cushion. Clara moved like a phantom. She didn't run. She flowed into the deep, dark recess of the large, carved oak wardrobe, pulling the door almost shut, leaving just a sliver of darkness to breathe through. Before Elias could even stand up fully, Delia was rapping sharply on the door. "Elias, are you awake? It is your Aunt Delia. I require immediate access to the medical cabinet. My nerves are quite shot this evening." Elias took a deep breath, trying to slow his pulse. He straightened his dressing gown, smoothing down the front, and opened the door. He tried to look sleepy and annoyed. "Aunt Delia, it's past midnight. Is everything all right?" Delia stood framed in the doorway, a tall, bony silhouette holding a small oil lamp. Her eyes, sharp as winter ice, darted immediately past Elias into the room. "Perfectly fine, nephew. Just a touch of the vapors. I told you, the tonic. It's in the upper drawer, yes?" She didn't wait for an answer, pushing past him and walking straight toward the small cabinet built into the wall. Elias watched her, every muscle tense. He could feel Clara's presence behind the thin wood of the wardrobe door. He prayed Delia wouldn't notice the slight vibration in the floorboards or the faint scent of cinnamon that always clung to Clara's clothing from the kitchen. Delia opened the cabinet, rummaging loudly, but her attention wasn't on the bottles. Her gaze swept across the room, the rumpled bed, the single candle burning low on the bedside table, the cushion where Elias had hidden the coat. "You keep the "A room warm tonight, Elias. For a man alone, it seems rather cozy." "It's a large room, Aunt. Needs the heat," Elias managed, trying to sound bored. Delia paused, her hand hovering over a small bottle of laudanum. She walked slowly toward the fireplace, running a finger along the mantelpiece. She stopped directly in front of the wardrobe. Elias felt the sweat prickle on his back. "And what is this?" Delia asked, not looking at him, but pointing a toe at the floor. Elias leaned in. It was a single tiny strand of dark thread, the exact color used in the lining of his riding coat. "A thread, Aunt. I must have tracked it in from the tailor's shop weeks ago." Delia finally looked at him, her eyes narrowed. "You are becoming careless, Elias. A master should not have stray threads or unnecessary warmth in his chambers. It suggests a lack of order." She finally retrieved her tonic, but she lingered for another full minute, letting the silence hang heavy between them. "Good night. Nephew, try to maintain the propriety the Thorn name demands. We are all watching." With a final, meaningful look that felt like a physical blow, Delia turned and left, her cane tapping a slow, deliberate rhythm down the hall until the sounds faded completely. Elias waited 5 full minutes after the silence returned before rushing to the wardrobe. He yanked the door open. Clara stumbled out, pale but composed, rubbing her arms. "She knew something," Clara whispered, her voice shaking. "Slightly. She didn't see me, but she knew the air was disturbed." Elias pulled her into a tight, desperate embrace. "It's getting too dangerous, Clara. Too many eyes. Robert is here now, and he is 10 times worse than Delia." The holiday gathering turned Willow Creek from a private sanctuary into a cage. The house was full of noise and obligation. Elias found himself constantly performing, playing the role of the dutiful, if slightly eccentric, master of the house, while his entire existence was dedicated to hiding the woman who was actually his wife. Uncle Robert, meanwhile, treated Elias's plantation like his own failing property. He spent his days barking orders at the overseer and questioning Elias's account books. "You are running this place like a charity, Elias," Robert thundered one afternoon in the dining room while Clara was clearing the lunch plates. "You must sell off the unproductive hands. And that girl, Clara, she is too expensive to keep merely for dusting. She needs to be put to harder labor or sold south where she can fetch a proper price." Clara kept her expression blank, stacking the plates with meticulous care. Elias felt a surge of murderous rage, but he kept his voice low and controlled. "Clara is essential to the running of this house, Uncle, and my accounts are my own concern." Robert laughed, a loud, abrasive sound, "Still trying to play the benevolent master. It doesn't suit you, boy. It's weakness, and weakness invites disaster." The pressure was relentless. Elias found himself unable to eat, unable to sleep. The constant vigilance was exhausting him. He started drinking brandy late into the night, sitting alone in the library, staring at the shadows. It was during one of these late-night sessions that the first sharp pain hit him. It was a sudden, crushing squeeze in his chest, radiating down his arm. It lasted only a minute, but it stole his breath and left him weak, clutching the edge of his desk. He dismissed it as indigestion, the stress of Robert's presence, or perhaps too much strong coffee. But the pains returned. They were brief, unpredictable flashes. Warnings that his body was failing under the strain of his secret life. He didn't tell Clara. He couldn't bear to add his physical fragility to her already immense worry. He knew he was running out of time. He needed to ensure the will was safe, and that Clara understood exactly how to retrieve it. A few days before Christmas, the weather turned truly foul. A cold, driving rain lashed against the windows, confining everyone indoors. It was the perfect cover for a secret meeting. Elias sent Clara a coded message, a specific bottle of wine requested for the evening meal, which meant Meet me in the study after 1 a.m. They met in the dark study, the only light coming from the embers of the fire. We need to talk about the oak tree, Elias whispered, his voice sounding raspy. Clara nodded, her eyes wide in the gloom. Elias drew a rough map on a piece of scrap paper, detailing the precise location of the lead box. You must memorize this, Clara. Burn it into your mind. If I should fall ill or if I simply don't wake up, you must act immediately. Do not mourn me first. You must secure your future. He emphasized the steps. First, you wait for the immediate chaos to pass. Robert will take over immediately. He will search the house safe for the will. He will not find the new one. He will try to enforce the old, outdated document. And then, Clara asked, her hand gripping his arm tightly, then you must send a coded message to Mr. Harrison in Montgomery. You tell him that the spring planting requires immediate attention. That phrase means the will must be executed. You also contact Dr. Peterson. He is the only one who can testify to my sound mind in the weeks before my death. He handed her a small folded piece of paper, the contact information for both men. You must retrieve the box yourself. No one can know you went to that tree. Wait for a night when the house is quiet and the moon is dark. Bring a small spade. Dig exactly 3 feet down toward the creek side of the trunk. Clara felt a profound terror. Elias was speaking as if his death were a certainty, not a possibility. Elias, please, she pleaded, don't talk like this. You are strong. We will survive this. We will run away. No, my love, Elias sighed, pulling her close. Running means a life of poverty and constant fear for you. I want you to be the mistress of Willow Creek, secure and safe. This land is yours now. I have paid the price for it. He kissed her fiercely, a kiss that tasted of fear and finality. He had secured her freedom, but he had signed his own death warrant by doing so, committing himself to a life of unbearable stress. The following morning, Christmas Eve, the rain had stopped, but the air was bitterly cold, the sky a heavy, bruised grey. Uncle Robert was already up, stomping around the stables, complaining about the quality of the horses. Elias, feeling unusually sluggish and heavy, decided he needed to confront Robert about the accounting one last time. He needed to establish his authority before the full family arrived for the Christmas dinner. He found Robert leaning over the stable railing, shouting at a young groom. That gelding is lame. Sell it immediately, Elias, or I will arrange the sale myself. You waste too much money keeping useless stock. Robert roared. Elias walked up, standing tall despite the dull ache in his chest. Robert, stop. This is my property, and I will manage it. You are a guest here. You will cease giving orders to my staff immediately. Robert turned, his face flushed purple with anger and indignation. He was not used to being challenged. Guest? I am your family boy. I am trying to save your inheritance from your own incompetence. You spend too much time coddling the house staff and not enough time running a business. I am running it exactly as I see fit, Uncle. If you cannot respect my authority, then you may leave Willow Creek this afternoon, Elias said, his voice ringing with a conviction he didn't quite feel. The confrontation was sharp, public, and shocking to the few stable hands and house servants who witnessed it. Robert stared at Elias, his eyes full of malice. You dare threaten me? You are a fool, Elias. A soft, sentimental fool who will lose everything he owns. As Robert spat the words, Elias felt the air rush out of his lungs. The dull ache in his chest exploded into a searing, paralyzing fire. It was worse than before, a monstrous, crushing force. He tried to speak, to retort, but no sound came out. His knees buckled. What is wrong with you? Robert sneered, thinking Elias was dramatically feigning illness. Elias reached out a trembling hand, trying to grab the railing for support, but his vision was tunneling. He felt the cold, muddy ground rushing up to meet him. He collapsed, heavily, without a sound, right there in the stable-yard mud, his body instantly lifeless. Robert stood over him for a moment, stunned into silence by the suddenness of the event. Then, the panic set in. "Elias, what is this? Get Dr. Peterson, quickly!" Robert bellowed, the sound echoing across the silent yard. The stable hands scrambled. The news spread through the house like a wildfire fed by kerosene. The master was dead. Clara heard the screams and the commotion from the kitchen. She saw the servants rushing past the windows, their faces pale with terror. She knew instantly what had happened. The fear that had been her constant companion for months crystallized into cold, focused determination. She walked out of the kitchen, her face a mask of professional shock, and found Aunt Delia already wailing dramatically in the main hall. Uncle Robert stomped in, covered in mud, his face a mixture of shock and calculating urgency. Dr. Peterson, thank goodness, was already staying at the house for the Christmas holiday. He rushed to the yard, examined Elias briefly, and delivered the grim confirmation. It was his heart, sudden and fast. There was nothing to be done. The grief that tore through Clara's soul was immense, a silent internal scream. She had lost her husband, her protector, the only man who had ever truly seen her. Yet, she could not shed a single tear. If she showed too much emotion, it would confirm Delia's suspicions. Clara immediately reverted to the role of the hyper-efficient housekeeper, taking charge of the immediate practical necessities, ordering the body moved, calling for clean linens, ensuring the house remained orderly despite the chaos. This composure, however, only served to infuriate the family. Uncle Robert, having recovered from his shock, immediately seized control. "I am the nearest male relative," he announced, puffing out his chest. "I will manage the estate until the will is read. Clara, you will prepare Elias's study. We need the safe opened immediately." Clara nodded, her hands steady. This was exactly what Elias had predicted, the immediate rush for control. Robert, Aunt Delia, and Cousin Martha gathered in the study, while a locksmith, hastily summoned from the nearest town, worked on the large iron safe built into the wall. The locksmith finally sprung the lock. Robert pulled open the heavy door and reached inside, pulling out the various deeds, bonds, and documents stored within. He found a thick parchment tied with a ribbon labeled "Last Will and Testament of Elias Thorne, 1852. Robert broke the seal and spread the document on the desk. He scanned the contents quickly, a smirk spreading across his face. "Excellent," Robert declared, slapping the paper. "This is an early will, drawn up before he took control of the estate. It names me as the primary executor and beneficiary, should Elias die unmarried and without heirs. The land, the house, and all the property, including the human property, reverts to my control." Aunt Delia sighed in relief. "Thank heavens for order. I knew Elias was sentimental, but I didn't think he was entirely mad." Robert looked around the room, his eyes sharp. "Are there any other documents? Any more recent wills?" They searched the entire safe, pulling out every paper. There was nothing else. "Well, there you have it," Robert stated, standing tall. "The 1852 will is the standing document. As of this moment, Willow Creek and all its assets are under my management. I will begin selling off the unproductive assets after the new year." His eyes landed on Clara, who was standing quietly near the door, waiting to be dismissed. "Clara," Robert said, his voice cold and commanding, "you are now my property. You will report to my wife at my plantation 20 miles west. Immediately after the funeral, I will have no unnecessary house servants here, and certainly none who have been indulged the way Elias indulged you." Clara felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. The fear was real now. She was being separated from the only home she had ever known, and put under the control of the cruelest man she knew. She had to act, but she couldn't reveal the will yet, not until Robert had fully established his claim and everyone believed the 1852 document was the only truth. That way, the shock of the real will would be stronger. "Yes, Master Robert," Clara replied, her voice perfectly submissive, masking the steel beneath. "I will. Prepare my things." That evening, the house was silent and heavy. The family was busy mourning publicly and plotting privately. Robert had locked the safe again, securing the 1852 will. Clara moved through the house like a ghost. She had to find a way to contact Mr. Harrison and Dr. Peterson without Robert noticing. She knew Robert had placed a guard, a rough, imposing field hand named Silas, loyal to Robert, outside the master's study, ensuring no one interfered with the house affairs. Clara went to the kitchen and began preparing a late supper for the grieving family, though no one was eating. She baked a small, simple loaf of cornbread, a gesture of comfort. She waited until 11 p.m., when the house was mostly dark. She approached Silas, the guard, who was slumped against the wall, half asleep. "Silas," she said softly, "Master Robert ordered that you have something to eat. You must maintain your strength." Silas grunted, suspicious. He knew Clara was too familiar with the former master. "I don't want your food, Clara. It's just cornbread, Silas, and a glass of fresh milk. You'll be cold out here all night." Clara placed the plate and the glass on a small table near him. The cornbread was steaming slightly. Silas, who hadn't eaten since noon, finally gave in and took a large bite. Clara watched him. Into the cornbread, she had mixed a small amount of a potent natural sedative, a root usually used to quiet colicky infants, but effective enough to ensure a deep sleep. Within 10 minutes, Silas's head slumped forward onto his chest. He was out cold. Clara didn't hesitate. She rushed to the back door, slipping out into the damp, cold night. She was wearing only her thin working dress and a shawl. The air bit at her skin, but she barely noticed. She had the map memorized. She knew she had to retrieve the evidence now, before she was shipped off to Robert's plantation. She ran across the dark lawn, avoiding the puddles, heading toward the farthest edge of the property, where the sprawling fields met the woods. The old dead oak tree stood like a black sentinel against the sky. When she reached the tree, she paused, catching her breath. The silence was absolute, broken only by the drip of water from the branches. She had brought a small gardening trowel, hidden beneath her shawl. She knelt down in the cold mud, feeling around the base of the massive trunk, exactly where Elias had told her. She found the specific root marker he had described. She began to dig. The ground was cold, hard and thick with roots. It took all her strength, but the urgency of her situation fueled her. She dug until her hands were raw and aching, the trowel scraping against stones and frozen dirt. 3 feet down. Clunk. The sound was faint, metallic, and glorious. She reached into the hole, scraping away the last of the mud, and pulled out the lead box. It was heavy, sealed tightly with wax, just as Elias had described. Clara stood up, clutching the box to her chest. This was it, her freedom, her vengeance. She didn't dare open it now. She quickly refilled the hole, patting down the mud and scattering leaves over the disturbed earth to hide the evidence. She hurried back toward the house, the lead box tucked securely under her shawl. She slipped back inside, past the still sleeping Silas, and went straight to her small room in the servants' quarters. She locked the door, a habit Elias had secretly allowed her, and placed the box on her small table. She lit a single candle. She pulled out the small piece of paper Elias had given her, the contact information for Mr. Harrison and Dr. Peterson, along with the coded message. She knew she couldn't simply ride to Montgomery. She needed a messenger. There was only one man she could trust completely, a man who moved freely between the properties and who had a fierce, silent loyalty to Elias. Moses, the old deaf stable hand who had helped arrange the marriage. Moses could not hear the threats or the gossip, making him the perfect, discreet agent. Clara knew Moses would be sleeping in the stable loft. She had to risk a second trip out into the night. She wrapped the lead box in a thick blanket and hid it beneath the loose floorboards under her bed. She then wrote 2 short notes, using the coded language Elias had taught her, signing them with the initials CT, Clara Thorne, a secret defiance she knew only Elias would have understood. The first note, addressed to Mr. Harrison, simply read, "The spring planting requires immediate attention. See Dr. Peterson first." The second note, addressed to Dr. Peterson, was more direct. "The master's final wishes were secured. I need you to confirm his fitness of mind when we meet Mr. Harrison." She slipped out again, this time heading for the stables. She woke Moses gently, placing the 2 sealed notes and a small handful of coins into his hand. Moses looked at her, his eyes asking the question he couldn't vocalize. Clara mouthed the words slowly and clearly, using the exaggerated movements she knew he could read. "Montgomery, tomorrow, Harrison, Peterson, go now, don't tell anyone." Moses's old face creased in understanding. He nodded once, solemnly, tucking the notes deep inside his coat. He knew the risk, but his loyalty to Elias and now to Clara was absolute. He immediately prepared his horse. Clara watched him ride out into the pre-dawn darkness. The messenger was gone. The bomb had been planted. She returned to the house just as the sun began to rise. She went back to the kitchen, putting on a pot of coffee, resuming her role as the quiet, grieving housekeeper, a slave preparing to be shipped away. Uncle Robert, bleary-eyed and self-important, came downstairs just as she was pouring the first cup. "Clara, I want you to pack your belongings immediately after the funeral," Robert ordered, taking the coffee without a word of thanks. "I'm sending you off with the wagon train tomorrow morning, and make sure you pack nothing of value that belongs to this house." "Yes, Master Robert," Clara replied, her voice soft and obedient. She looked at the man who thought he had just inherited her, the house and the land. She knew the secret she held beneath her floorboards, the truth that would explode the entire Thorne legacy. The funeral was held 3 days later, a cold, somber affair attended by every significant planter in the county. Elias was buried in the family plot, beneath the cold Alabama earth. The moment the last dirt was thrown onto the casket, Uncle Robert began moving with ruthless speed. He started inventorying the estate, marking certain items for immediate sale, and making it clear that the lives of the enslaved people were about to become much harder. Clara remained quiet, packing her few meager belongings, preparing for the journey to Robert's plantation. The family believed she was defeated, powerless, but she was waiting. She knew it would take 3 days for Moses to reach Montgomery, deliver the messages, and for Mr. Harrison to travel back to Willow Creek. On the 3rd day after the funeral, Robert was sitting in Elias's study, now his study, reviewing the account books and feeling immensely satisfied with his sudden rise in fortune. Aunt Delia was nearby, organizing the silver, pleased that order had been restored. The sound of carriage wheels crunching on the gravel road outside interrupted the quiet afternoon. A servant rushed in. "Master Robert, there is a lawyer here from Montgomery, a Mr. Harrison, and Dr. Peterson is with him." Robert frowned. "Harrison? I don't know any Harrison. Send them away. I am busy with the estate." "They insist on seeing you, Master Robert. They say it is regarding the late Master Elias Thorne's affairs." Robert stood up, annoyed. He assumed Harrison was some minor creditor. He straightened his coat. "Very well, show them in, but be quick about it." Clara, who was dusting the hallway outside the study, froze. They were here. Mr. Harrison and Dr. Peterson walked into the study, both looking serious and grim. Harrison was a nervous man, but today his voice was steady. "Mr. Thorne," Harrison began, nodding briefly to Robert. "We are here regarding the true and final last will and testament of Elias Thorne." Robert laughed, a short, dismissive bark. "Nonsense, sir. I have the only valid will dated 1852 in the safe. The matter is settled." "I assure you it is not settled," Harrison insisted. "I am in possession of a full certified copy of the final will, signed and witnessed just 3 months ago. However, the original document is required for probate, and we understand it was not found in the house safe." Robert's face went white with fury. He looked at Dr. Peterson. "Is this true, Doctor? Did Elias sign some foolish final document?" Dr. Peterson, a man known for his integrity, met Robert's gaze unflinchingly. "Mr. Thorne was of sound mind and body. When he executed that document in my presence, he was acutely aware of his actions and his intentions." Robert pounded his fist on the desk. "This is madness, a forgery. I will not stand for it. Where is this supposed final will?" Harrison looked directly at Clara, who was still standing quietly in the hallway, listening. He gave her a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Clara knew the moment had arrived. She walked into the study, her demeanor calm, her eyes holding the fire of 1,000 silent battles. "The original will is not a forgery, Master Robert," Clara said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the tense air. "It is exactly where Master Elias intended it to be." Robert spun around, his mouth agape. "You! What do you know of this girl? Get out of this room!" Clara ignored him. She looked at Harrison. "The original document sealed in a lead box is currently under my protection. It will be presented to the court only when my freedom and my safety are absolutely guaranteed, as Master Elias stipulated." She had spoken the truth. Robert Thorne, the great patriarch, had been defied by his own property. The silence in the room was deafening, the air thick with the smell of inevitable destruction. The battle for Willow Creek had begun. "The original will is not a forgery, Master Robert," Clara said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the tense air. "It is exactly where Master Elias intended it to be." Robert spun around, his mouth agape. His face was a roadmap of shock and sudden venomous rage. "You! What do you know of this girl? Get out of this room. You have no standing here." Clara ignored the command. She stood her ground, facing the 3 men and Aunt Delia, who was clutching her lace handkerchief and staring at Clara as if she were a snake that had just crawled onto the rug. "I know everything, Master Robert," Clara continued, her eyes fixed on Mr. Harrison, the lawyer. "Master Elias entrusted the location to me. He made provisions for me to retrieve it should the first outdated will be discovered in the safe." Robert lunged forward, grabbing Clara's arm. "You stole it. You put that poor man up to this, influencing him in his final days. Where is the document, you insolent wretch? Give it to me now." Clara didn't flinch, even under his heavy grip. She looked past Robert to Mr. Harrison. "Mr. Harrison, I will not reveal the location, nor will I retrieve the box, until I have your guarantee, in the presence of Dr. Peterson, that Master Robert will not lay a hand on me, nor attempt to sell me south, regardless of the outcome of this impending legal battle." The audacity of her demand stunned the room into a silence even deeper than the morning. A slave making demands of a white landowner and a lawyer in the middle of Alabama in 1858. It was unheard of. "This is coercion," Robert roared, dropping her arm as if it burned him. "She is property. She cannot make demands." Mr. Harrison, though clearly uncomfortable, knew the stakes. Without the original document, his certified copy was just paper, easily dismissed as unreliable evidence. "Mr. Thorne," Harrison said, addressing Robert firmly, "if this document exists, And if it is the only proof of Elias's final wishes, then we must secure it. If you threaten this woman, she may, in fear, destroy the evidence. We must proceed with caution. Caution? We should have her whipped until she tells us where she hid it. Aunt Delia shrieked, finally finding her voice. Dr. Peterson stepped forward, his calm presence a necessary anchor. Robert, Elias was my patient. I was a witness to his intent. If you want to honor the memory of your nephew, you will allow the law to proceed and secure the document. Mr. Harrison is correct. You will not touch Clara, nor will you move her from this property until the will is presented to the court. Do you agree to this temporary truce? Robert glowered at Clara, his chest heaving. He saw the house slipping through his fingers, the vast wealth potentially going to this woman, this housekeeper. He had to see the document to fight it. Fine, Robert spat out the word. I agree, but I swear if this document proves to be anything other than a forgery, I will see you both ruined. Harrison turned to Clara. We have his word, madam. Now, where is the will? Clara nodded once, a gesture of profound relief that she quickly masked. It is in my room, under the floorboards. I retrieved it the night Master Elias died. The lead box was brought into the study, heavy and cold. Harrison carefully broke the wax seal, his hands trembling slightly. Robert and Delia crowded around the desk, their breaths held tight. Harrison unrolled the thick parchment. It was dated just 2 months prior, the proof that Elias had been thinking of this until the very end. He began to read, his voice clear and formal, detailing the traditional opening clauses. Then he reached the section that mattered. To my loyal and devoted housekeeper Clara, who has attended to my comfort and managed the domestic affairs of Willow Creek with exceptional diligence for the past 5 years, I hereby grant and bequeath, first and foremost, her immediate and unconditional freedom from the bonds of servitude to be effective upon the reading of this will. Aunt Delia gasped so loudly it sounded like a sail tearing. Harrison continued, ignoring the rising fury in the room. Furthermore, in recognition of her invaluable service, I bequeath to the said Clara the sum of $20,000, to be drawn from the Thorne Family Trust and the property known as Willow Creek, including the main house, all outbuildings, and the surrounding 500 acres, to be held by her in fee simple, free, and clear of all encumbrances. Robert let out a strangled cry, a sound of pure wounded entitlement. 500 acres? The house? This is insanity. He was clearly deranged, coerced. Silence, Robert, Dr. Peterson commanded, putting a restraining hand on Robert's shoulder. Let the man finish. Harrison cleared his throat and read the final crucial clause that Elias had insisted upon, the one meant to anticipate the family's claims of madness. I state here under oath and before my witnesses that I am of sound mind and body, and that this bequest is made freely and willingly, without duress or coercion, as a reward for the years of personal comfort and devotion provided by Clara, and to ensure her security and independence in perpetuity. When Harrison finished, he rolled the document back up. The air in the study was thick enough to chew. Robert looked physically ill, his vast fortune and social standing suddenly threatened by a piece of paper, and a woman he considered chattel. This will is void, Robert declared, his voice shaking. It violates the laws of Alabama regarding property transfer and undue influence. Elias was a fool, clearly, manipulated by this conniving servant. We will challenge this on every possible ground. We will prove she seduced him and coerced him into this madness. Aunt Delia was already weeping hysterically, clutching her chest. The Thorne name, ruined, the house given to a servant. This is God's judgment upon us. Mr. Harrison looked at Robert with a lawyer's cold determination. "Mr. Thorne, your challenge is expected. However, as of this moment, Clara is legally a free woman. She is the rightful claimant to this property until a court decrees otherwise. Furthermore, she is entitled to protection and maintenance from the estate during the probate process." This meant Robert could not simply sell her or throw her out. She was now his legal opponent, living under his roof. The battle lines were drawn instantly. Robert seized the 1852 will and stormed out of the study, heading straight for the telegraph office to summon his own lawyers in Mobile. He was going to fight this with every penny and every connection he possessed. Clara, now technically free, remained at Willow Creek. Her status was terrifyingly ambiguous. She was no longer property, but she was trapped in a house full of people who hated her and wished her dead. Her only protection was the proximity of the will and the presence of Mr. Harrison, who spent the next 2 days establishing the initial legal defense. Harrison knew the case would hinge entirely on Elias's state of mind and the appearance of undue influence. He needed solid proof that Elias's intentions were genuine and deeply rooted, proof that went beyond the formal language of the will. He met with Clara privately in the library, the doors locked against the eavesdropping family. "Clara," Harrison said, leaning forward, lowering his voice to a whisper, "we need to anticipate Robert's strategy. He will paint you as a temptress, a schemer who took advantage of a lonely master. We need evidence of Elias's long-term, rational commitment to you, something that proves this was not a sudden fancy." Clara reached inside the collar of her dress and pulled out the thin gold chain. At the end of the chain, hidden against her skin, was the simple, thin gold wedding band Elias had placed on her finger in the root cellar. She held it out to Harrison. "He gave me this, in the presence of Reverend Silas, 6 months before the will was drafted. We were married." Harrison stared at the ring, then at Clara's face. He was a cautious man, deeply aware of the law. A marriage between a white man and a person of color is not recognized under Alabama law, Clara. It would instantly invalidate the will and confirm Robert's claims of Elias's madness and your manipulation. "I know the law, Mr. Harrison," Clara said quietly, tucking the ring back inside her dress. "But it proves his intent. It proves he thought of me as his wife, not his servant, when he made this will." Harrison nodded slowly. He couldn't use the marriage in court, but it gave him the moral certainty he needed. It transformed Elias's actions from a moment of foolish sentimentality into a deliberate, calculated act of protection for his spouse. "We will focus on the testimony of Dr. Peterson, who can speak to Elias's sound mind, and the specific complex legal clauses in the will itself, which show careful planning, not madness," Harrison concluded. "But you must be ready, Clara. Robert Thorne will use every dirty trick he knows to break you." The first legal maneuver came swiftly. Robert, through his aggressive mobile lawyers, filed an immediate injunction, seizing control of the liquid assets of the estate and preventing Clara from taking immediate possession of Willow Creek. The house was placed under temporary management, essentially leaving Robert in charge until the court ruled. Clara was trapped. She was free but penniless, living in the house that was legally hers, yet controlled by the man who wanted to destroy her. The family's behavior immediately shifted from guarded suspicion to open, brutal hostility. Robert's wife, a thin, sour woman named Eleanor, arrived with their 2 grown daughters, treating Clara not just as a servant, but as a criminal. Eleanor took over the running of the house, deliberately making Clara's life miserable. "Clara," Eleanor would call out, loudly enough for the other servants to hear, "since you are no longer a servant, I require you to vacate the house quarters immediately. You may stay in the old laundry shack behind the smokehouse. and you will not set foot in the main kitchen unless Master Robert specifically requests a glass of water." Clara moved her few belongings to the damp, cold laundry shack. It was a deliberate, petty cruelty designed to remind her of her true place in their eyes. She endured it silently. She knew that every reaction she gave them would be used as evidence of her aggressive or unstable nature. Aunt Delia, meanwhile, took to circulating rumors in town, claiming Clara had poisoned Elias, that his sudden heart attack was too convenient. The whispers grew quickly, fueled by the racial prejudice of the time. Clara was isolated. The other enslaved people on the plantation, while perhaps secretly cheering her defiance, were too terrified of Robert's immediate, brutal control to offer any support. She was alone in her fight. But Clara had Elias's instructions, and she had the will. She spent her days studying the law books Harrison had left her, trying to understand the labyrinthine process of probate and challenge. She became a student of her own defense. The preliminary hearing was set for early spring in the county seat. It was a procedural step, but it would be the first time Clara would face the Thorne family in a courtroom, not as property, but as a claimant. Harrison prepared Clara meticulously. "They will try to break your composure, Clara. They will ask invasive, suggestive questions about your relationship with Elias. You must stick to the truth, but only the truth that is legally safe. You were the housekeeper. You provided comfort and service. You were rewarded for loyalty." Clara practiced her testimony in the quiet of the laundry shack, rehearsing the precise, emotionless answers. "Did you ever share a bed with Elias Thorne?" "I slept in the master's chambers occasionally, to tend to his late-night needs, as was part of my duty as a devoted housekeeper." A legal answer, technically true, though omitting the nature of their relationship. "Did you discuss the contents of the will with him?" "No. Master Elias kept his affairs private. He simply informed me of the location of the document, should he pass suddenly." She had to lie by omission, protecting the sacred secret of their marriage to protect her freedom. As the weeks dragged into months, the atmosphere at Willow Creek became poisonous. Robert and Eleanor treated the house as their own, redecorating, selling off pieces of furniture Elias had loved, and generally erasing his memory. One afternoon, Robert, feeling particularly confident after a favorable ruling on the estate's cash flow, cornered Clara near the stables. "You know, girl," Robert sneered, his breath smelling of whiskey, "you can save yourself a lot of pain. If you drop this ridiculous claim now, I will give you $1,000 and let you leave the county. If you continue, I will ensure you spend the rest of your life in prison, or worse." Clara met his gaze, unflinching. She remembered Elias's fierce devotion, the cold night in the root cellar, the weight of the gold ring on her chain. "Master Elias made his wishes clear, Master Robert. I intend to honor them. I will see this through to the end." Robert laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You have spirit, I'll give you that. But spirit doesn't win against the law, Clara, especially not against the Thorne name." The day of the preliminary hearing arrived, a crisp, windy morning in March. Clara dressed in the same simple dark dress she had worn for her wedding, a silent message to herself. She rode into town in a borrowed wagon, accompanied by Moses, the stable hand, who served as her unofficial deaf bodyguard. The courthouse was a grand, imposing structure of white stone. The air inside smelled of dust and old paper. The small courtroom was packed with local planters and curious townspeople, all eager to witness the spectacle, the battle between the mighty Thorne family and the former slave who dared to claim their inheritance. Robert, Eleanor, and Delia sat together at the defense table, dressed in expensive black mourning clothes, looking like judges already. Robert's lawyers, a pair of slick, arrogant men from Mobile, were whispering confidently. Clara sat at the claimant's table with Mr. Harrison, feeling the weight of every hostile gaze in the room. The judge, Judge Harlan, was an old man known for his stern adherence to tradition and property rights. His presence alone favored the Thorne family. The hearing was brief. Harrison presented the final will, and Robert's lawyers presented the 1852 will and immediately filed their formal objection: undue influence and testamentary incapacity. Robert's lead counsel, Mr. Davies, stood up, addressing the judge with theatrical gravity. "Your Honor, we are here today because the deceased, Elias Thorne, was clearly the victim of a calculated long-term manipulation by his servant Clara. We intend to prove that this woman, who was his property, used her position of intimate access to coerce and confuse a lonely, sentimental man in his final months, resulting in a document that is an affront to the laws of this state and the sanctity of property." Harrison stood to counter. "Your Honor, we will prove that Elias Thorne was a man of firm resolve and sound mind, who was merely rewarding a loyal employee for years of service. We have the testimony of Dr. Peterson to that effect. The will is valid." Judge Harlan frowned, looking over the documents. He then looked directly at Clara, his gaze cold and assessing. "Clara?" The judge addressed her, using only her first name, a subtle reminder of her former status. "You are the claimant here. Do you understand the gravity of the accusations being made against you?" "Yes, Your Honor," Clara replied, her voice unwavering. "And you maintain that you deserve this house and this fortune purely for your service as a housekeeper?" Clara took a deep breath. She looked at Robert, whose face was a mask of smug certainty. "I maintain, Your Honor, that Master Elias Thorne was a man of honor, and he wished for his final commands to be followed. I served him faithfully, and he chose to reward that faithfulness with the only security he could offer me in this world." Judge Harlan banged his gavel. "The court accepts the challenge. The matter is too complex and the claims too severe to be dismissed summarily. We will proceed to a full trial. Until then, the injunction stands. The estate remains under temporary management. Clara, you are free, but you must remain in the county, and you will not interfere with the management of Willow Creek." The trial was set for 6 weeks later. The battle was now official, public, and deadly serious. As Clara left the courtroom, navigating the hostile crowd, she caught sight of Robert and Delia. Robert offered her a look that promised utter destruction. "Enjoy your freedom, Clara," Robert muttered, low enough only for her to hear. "It won't last. When I am done, you will have nothing but the clothes on your back and the shame of having dragged the Thorne name through the mud." Clara didn't flinch. She knew Robert was terrified. He was fighting not just for money, but for his entire world view. Elias's will was a revolutionary document, a direct challenge to the power structure of the South. She returned to the laundry shack, feeling the full, crushing weight of her isolation. She was no longer fighting just for her own freedom, but for Elias's memory and for the validity of their secret love. She sat on her cot, pulled out the gold ring, and held it tightly. 6 weeks until the trial. 6 weeks to prepare for the fight that would either secure her life forever or send her to certain ruin. The storm was coming, and she was standing right in the center of it. The 6 weeks leading up to the trial were a siege. Robert Thorne, having assumed temporary control of Willow Creek, used the house like a weapon. He had Clara confined to the cold laundry shack, ensuring she was fed only the coarsest scraps, and he forbade the other enslaved people from speaking to her. He was trying to break her spirit, to make her look ragged and desperate before the court, but Clara was fueled by Elias's sacrifice. She spent her days reading the law books Mr. Harrison had provided, finding strength in the complex language Elias had used to protect her. She understood that she was fighting not just for her life, but for the truth of their love, a truth that could never be spoken aloud. The day of the trial finally arrived. The courtroom was even more crowded than before, buzzing with anticipation. Robert and his family, dressed in their finest, sat opposite Clara, radiating contempt. Mr. Harrison opened the defense of the will, focusing intently on Dr. Peterson's testimony. The doctor, a man respected throughout the county, spoke clearly about Elias's final months. Mr. Thorne was stressed, yes, Dr. Peterson stated under oath, but he was acutely rational. He discussed his business affairs with me, and he detailed the need for a complex will to protect his assets and ensure the future of his most loyal employee. He was not mad, nor was he confused. He was planning meticulously. Robert's lead lawyer, Mr. Davies, attacked this testimony fiercely, but Peterson remained unshaken. Elias's rationality, established by the physician, was the first stone removed from Robert's wall of argument. Then came the attack on Clara. Davies called several house servants to the stand, people Robert had intimidated, who testified that Clara had been too familiar with the master, that she received special treatment, and that she often stayed in his chambers late at night. The implication was clear. Clara was a calculating mistress who had leveraged her sexual access into financial gain. The courtroom gasped when Davies finally called Clara to the stand. She walked forward, head held high, wearing the simple dark dress. She looked fragile, but her eyes were steady. Davies began his assault immediately. "Clara, is it not true that you were frequently alone with Elias Thorne, often late into the night?" "Yes, sir," Clara replied calmly. "I was the housekeeper. My duties often extended late, ensuring the master's comfort and preparing the house for the next day." "Did you at any point use your influence to convince Mr. Thorne that he should leave you his fortune?" "No, sir. Master Elias was a private man. He never discussed the contents of his will with me." Davies leaned in, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "You claim you were merely a loyal employee, yet Mr. Thorne left you $20,000 and the entirety of Willow Creek, a fortune that should have gone to his blood family. If you were not his mistress, if you were not coercing him, then why did he choose to defy the entire social order of Alabama for you?" The question hung heavy in the air. This was the core of Robert's argument. The bequest was so outrageous, it could only be the result of manipulation. Clara looked directly at Judge Harlan, her voice clear and strong. She didn't deny the intimacy, but she redefined it. "Your Honor, I served Master Elias for many years. I knew his worries, his fears, and his deepest desire to see Willow Creek maintained with care and respect. Master Elias was a kind man, but he was also a man who feared the chaos that would follow his death. He knew that the family named in the old will, Master Robert, did not share his vision for the land or the people who worked it. He feared that upon his death, I, as his most loyal confidant, would be sold away, and the house I had cared for would be ruined." She paused, letting the silence emphasize her next words. "Master Elias did not reward me for seduction, Your Honor. He rewarded me for my absolute unwavering loyalty. He gave me freedom and security because he knew I was the only person who would honor his memory by protecting his home from those who would destroy it for profit." It was a brilliant maneuver. She shifted the focus from her alleged moral failing to Robert's known reputation for ruthlessness. She positioned herself not as a gold digger, but as the protector of the Thorne legacy against a greedy relative. Robert leaped up, red-faced. "She is insulting the family. This is slander." Judge Harlan hammered his gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Thorne. The court will hear the claimant's statement." Harrison followed up swiftly, presenting evidence of the meticulous, complex legal language in the final will. language that required weeks of collaboration with a lawyer, not a moment of passion or madness. The will itself was proof of Elias's rational intent. After a long, tense deliberation, Judge Harlan returned to the bench. The entire courtroom leaned forward. "This court is bound by the law of this state." Judge Harlan began, his voice slow and deliberate. "The law recognizes the right of a man to dispose of his property as he sees fit, provided he is of sound mind and not subjected to undue influence." He looked down at Robert, then at Clara. "The defense has failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Elias Thorne was of unsound mind when he executed the 1858 will. Dr. Peterson's testimony is clear on this point. Furthermore, while the relationship between the deceased and the claimant was unconventional and, frankly, highly improper by the standards of this community," he said, casting a disapproving glance at Clara, "the claimant's testimony regarding the motive, reward for loyalty and protection of the estate is plausible, given the known character of the principal beneficiary of the previous will." Robert visibly stiffened. The 1858 will is a complex document drafted with clear legal foresight. It is not the product of a deranged or coerced mind. Therefore, the judge stated, his voice ringing out, "The court finds the last will and testament of Elias Thorne, dated 1858, to be valid." Judge Harlan slammed the gavel down one last time. "The claimant, Clara, is hereby confirmed as a free woman and the rightful heir to Willow Creek and the stipulated funds." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, shouts, and the frantic whispers of the shocked community filled the air. Robert Thorne stood frozen, his face the color of ash. He had lost. He had lost the house, the land, the fortune, and the public battle, all to the woman he considered property. His lawyers rushed to him, murmuring about immediate appeals, but the finality in the judge's voice was unmistakable. Aunt Delia began to sob uncontrollably, the entire Thorne legacy shattering around her. Clara, however, remained perfectly still. She felt the immense release of tension, but she allowed herself only a single silent tear to track down her cheek, a tear for Elias, whose love had finally bought her freedom. Mr. Harrison immediately began the process of securing the funds and the deed. Robert was forced, by court order, to vacate Willow Creek within 48 hours. The humiliation was absolute. He left Alabama shortly thereafter, financially and socially ruined, the disgrace of the will forever attached to the Thorne name. Clara, now Clara Thorne in her own heart, though still Clara legally to the world, returned to Willow Creek as its undisputed mistress. The immediate days were surreal. She walked through the grand hallways, no longer dusting them, but owning them. The remaining house staff, seeing Robert's defeat, quickly shifted their loyalty, recognizing the new, unshakable authority in Clara's quiet demeanor. Her first act as the owner of Willow Creek was to send for Moses, the deaf stable hand who had risked everything for her. She granted him his immediate freedom and a small parcel of land on the property, ensuring his security for life. Clara knew the prejudice would not vanish overnight. She was a free black woman, a former slave, owning one of the largest plantations in the county. The local community would never fully accept her, but she had the law, the deed, and the money to fight any further attempts at seizing her property. She never married again. Elias was her husband, and she carried his memory like a precious, hidden flame. The thin gold ring remained on the chain around her neck, tucked safely beneath the silk and lace dresses. She now wore dresses befitting the mistress of Willow Creek. She ran the plantation not with the iron fist of Robert, but with the quiet efficiency and deep respect for the land that Elias had always wished for. She invested in the education of the children of the enslaved people, preparing them for a future she hoped would be radically different from the past. Years later, Sitting on the veranda at sunset, the light hitting the dining room just right, Clara would often think of Elias. He had not only given her freedom, he had given her power. He had used the very laws designed to oppress her to secure her future, destroying his own family's pride and legacy in the process. She was the master of Willow Creek, a constant living testament to a love that defied the laws of man, a secret marriage sealed in the damp earth of a root cellar, and a promise fulfilled through the cold, hard justice of a contested will. She was safe, she was secure, and she was forever his wife, standing strong against the heavy weight of the Alabama sky. The secret was safe, and the price of her freedom had been paid in full.